What's going on, everybody? I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 134 of the Adult Education Podcast. This week, I'm speaking with Fandango managing editor Erik Davis. Thanks so much for checking out the Adult Education Podcast. If this is your first time joining me, I hope that you like what you hear and that you subscribe and stick with us. I would really appreciate it if you would take a second to leave a 5-star rating on whatever platform you're using, leave a review if they ask you to, and feel free to share the show with your friends. Word of mouth is the best way to inspire new people to check it out. I love music, which is something you've probably picked up on since I've had a bunch of musical guests on this podcast, but I also love movies. The only thing that I enjoy doing nearly as much as going to see live music is just sitting down in a theater or on my couch with a big bucket of popcorn, enjoying a good film. That being said, I haven't spent much time in theaters over the last few years. Like most everybody else, the pandemic interrupted my movie going, and I haven't really gotten back into it. There are a lot of reasons for that, probably the biggest one being that I'm a dad now and I just don't have the same freedom that I used to. But I've also leaned a lot more into streaming services. I'm fine, honestly, with waiting a few weeks to see a movie in the comfort of my own home. And I'm not alone here. Box office revenues have not quite climbed back to what they were pre-pandemic. There are some big movies here and there. Yeah, we can't deny that. But overall, it's been a lot slower than it used to be. But every once in a while, you need to hit the theater. As we saw this summer, Barbie became the highest grossing film of the year, and it was an absolute pop culture phenomenon. So people are still excited to go to the movies. It just has to be something special to bring them out. This week on the Adult Education Podcast, I'm catching up with a movie expert. Joining me is Fandango managing editor Erik Davis. We'll talk about the huge summer at the box office with Barbenheimer. What do films need to do to bring people back out? And what's coming up for the fall and winter season? Oh, and of course, how Taylor Swift may change the movie game for musicians as well. Yeah, that's going to be a good part of this conversation too. I hope you enjoy my chat with Erik Davis. Erik, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on here, man.
Good. Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure. One thing I love to talk about, well, two things would be music and movies. So I'm going to cover one of them here with you, which I'm excited about.
Yes, we could also talk about the Taylor Swift concert movie if you want to get a little music in there.
That's funny because that actually was going to be one of my first things for you is like, did you expect to see Taylor Swift saving the fall box office?
No, I don't think anybody expected to see that.
It's pretty wild. I mean, I'm not surprised at all that the fans are buying up tickets, but when I saw the expectations running anywhere from $80 to $125 million for the weekend, I was like, that's a legit opening weekend.
Yeah, I think it was brilliant, honestly, on the part of Taylor Swift. I think the most brilliant move that she made was that she did it as the tour was still kind of happening and it was still on. Like she didn't wait several months until the tour ended and then come out with this film. She kind of, took advantage, I think, of the heat of the tour and also, heard her fans saying, hey, I couldn't get tickets. This is one of the hardest tickets to get. My daughter couldn't get tickets. She really wanted to go. And so now she's really stoked to go to the film. So I think it was a really great thing she did for her fans. And I think it was a really smart thing that she did for in terms of a cinematic release.
I know not every artist has the same draw that she may have, but I've always wondered why more artists didn't try to capitalize on maybe a one night only in the theater kind of thing. Because I used to go to movies and see the advertisements for like the Broadway operas and different musicals they would show once in a while in the theater. I was always surprised artists didn't try to do more of that over time.
Yeah, I agree. Especially these days, I think Taylor Swift is really going to open the door for these other performers who are, really selling out. My daughter wants to go see Olivia Rodrigo. I said, let's see what Olivia Rodrigo tickets look like. And they're like hundreds of dollars, and so you got to take out a small loan to go like see Olivia Rodrigo. So I think it's a really smart play. And Taylor Swift, her film isn't just for the one night. Like she's letting it play for a while. And there are no streaming. We don't know if and when it'll arrive on streaming. So without a doubt, I definitely think, especially with these high profile tours, Beyonce, Olivia Rodrigo, if NSYNC comes back, stuff like that just is so in demand and in some cases is not affordable for people to go see live. I think the movie theater experience is a perfect venue for it.
I almost feel like this will be sort of a test run on a bigger level. You know what I mean? It's weird to say test run because it's going to make $100 million. But I think even you just mentioned Olivia Rodrigo. You talked about other artists. I mean, next year, 2024, for me as like a rock fan, a punk rock fan, it's the 30th anniversary of Green Day and Offspring and their major big albums that came out. Like, I expect there to be tours around those. I expect them now to watch what's happening with Taylor Swift and see, do we want to put that out in a theater and capitalize for the folks that couldn't make it out to an arena to see us play? I mean, I feel like this is going to be a test run to see what we can do over the next couple of years.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we've talked about this for a while. Like movie theaters there have been sporting,
Sure.
events that have been in theaters, and every once in a while you'll get a musical that was filmed and it'll be in a theater, and we have these re-releases, special re-releases. But yeah, I think, and this is not by any means the first concert movie.
Right.
Justin Bieber, et cetera. We've seen them. But I do think that the way that she's doing it here it's making so much noise that it's adding this, like, it's bringing people to the theater in ways that maybe they're not used to going to the theater.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really great for movie theaters. And I'm curious to see what other acts follow Taylor's lead here.
Well, we can shift gears a little bit, but I do want to know more about you and how you came to be such a movie guy, how you came to be the managing editor at Fandango. Like, tell me a little bit more about yourself and how movies became a major part of your life.
Yeah, I started, way back before social media, like 2004-ish, when people were blogging, which was a thing.
Oh, the good old days.
Social media. Yeah, the good old days where people had blogs and they linked their blogs to other people. And, this is, before like the infancy of MySpace. And so I was writing about movies. I had a movie blog, and AOL at the time. AOL was a big honcho in the online space, had acquired a group of blogs, so to speak, and were hiring people to write for them. And one of them was a movie blog called Cinematical. And I started writing for them and writing about movie news and reviewing films and going to film festivals. And it was at one of those film festivals where I met some folks from Fandango. It was still kind of young too. And Fandango was like, we sell movie tickets, but we'd love to, talk about other things and talk about movie news and let people know about these movies. And, do you want to come on and write, about movies for Fandango? And I said, sure. And that was sort of how it happened. And then after a little while, it was like, hey, do you want to, maybe go on the radio and talk about movies? I said, sure. Do you want to go on TV and talk about movies? I was like, yeah, well, why not? And here we are now, several years later. And, I'm still there, and I love it. This is kind of, I grew up going to the movies. I was not the coolest kid of the bunch. And so every weekend I had a couple friends and we were at the movies. We weren't at the keg parties and, all the high school dances. We would go to the movies and get a couple slices of pizza afterwards and talk about the movie. And so my father was obsessed with movies from a very young age. He was taking me and talking to me about, filmmakers of the 70s and the 60s. And so it's just been embedded in me since I was a kid. And as I've been working at Fandango over the years, and why I've never wanted to leave is because I just feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And I love it.
When I look back on my youth, there's so many random memories that pop up that include movies. Like you talked about your dad having a big influence on you. And I think so many people can track that back. For me, my grandfather took me to see Hook and A League of Their Own in the theaters. And to this day, those are still two of my top movies of all time, because I feel like when I sit down and watch it, it brings me back to that moment of sharing a theater experience with my grandfather, who's sadly no longer with us. But you remember that. You remember movie experiences in the theater like that. It's just something that sticks with you.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, one of mine is of that era is Jurassic Park.
Sure.
And seeing that, I saw that with my dad for the first time, and that was came out around the same time that surround sound was introduced.
That was the thing. It was like, oh my God, surround sound. There's dinosaurs everywhere.
Right? Like now, every little TV, if it's 20 inches, has surround sound built in, and so it's just something that we're so used to. But back then, when Jurassic Park came out, it was so new. And so like I was freaked out. I heard dinosaurs coming from every side of me, and I'll never forget that experience. And I think a lot of our, you know, when you ask somebody, what's your favorite film? A lot of people will go back to those films that they first saw when they were 9, 10, 11, because they remember those experiences. They remember those films. They really kind of, you know, just are so memorable to these people. And so I love it. And that's why I champion the movie going experience. And that's why I like also being at Fandango, because we sell movie tickets, and I'm such a fan of that experience. And so I preach it. And I think it's more important than ever now, because look, I have 2 kids who are on their phones all the time, and, you know, and they're like, a movie, Dad, what? Like, you want to go to a movie? And it's sort of, you know, so I think, you know, preaching the fact that this pastime is valuable to us, I think is more important than it's ever been before.
What's yours? Kind of a random question, and I'll tell you mine so you have a second to think about it. But what's your like weird movie that when you tell people you love it, everyone's kind of like, yeah, that's a kind of a strange. Like for me, I think back again, going back sort of like mid-90s era, my friends and I went to go see this movie called Very Bad Things. I don't know if you're familiar. It was Jeremy Piven, Christian Slater. It was kind of The Hangover before The Hangover came out, kind of dark comedy. We went 3 nights in a row because we loved that movie so much. We're probably the only group of people that went to see it in the theater. But when I talk about that film, no one's ever heard of it. And they're like, you're such a weirdo. What is this movie? What's yours?
I mean, I'll give you 2. One of them, similar to that, is the first Mortal Kombat movie.
Sure.
When that came out, it had like this techno soundtrack, like dun, 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 and I went with my buddies. We went to like the midnight showing because we were big arcade guys at the time and playing Mortal Kombat, and we went like similar to you, like 3 times to see Mortal Kombat and blasting techno on the way home, and it was ridiculous. And then there's this other, you know, I'm a big fan of coming of age movies, and of comedies and teen comedies. And there is this movie that came out, I want to say in the early 80s, right before Fast Times at Ridgemont High came out. So I think Fast Times kind of stole some thunder from this film called The Last American Virgin. And it's got this great soundtrack, and it's, you know, very similar to like American Pie or one of those films that came out 20 years later. But it's got this really amazing ending where like it's not a good ending for the hero of the film. And that always just stuck with me, to like look at this film, like look at the chances that it's taking with its ending. And it's like, it's so real life, and I was not expecting it because it was so true to what real life was. And I've always admired that film, and when I tell people about it, nobody's seen it.
I haven't seen it, but I've at least heard of it. So I'll take a point for that one, I guess. But we can talk more about current stuff, because I think movies, the experience in theaters, the box office, I've been fascinated by it these last couple of years, especially coming out of the pandemic, because obviously that interrupted everybody's lives in so many different ways. And of all the industries that we've been watching to see bounce back, the theater industry has in some ways, but also in some ways definitely not. So it's been interesting to keep an eye on that. When you look at all the numbers, I mean, yeah, tickets are more expensive now than they were, say, 5 years ago. So that, you know, definitely changes things a little bit. But when you look at it, like, how are you seeing the audience react to movies coming out? Are you feeling like the energy is there again? Like, what are you seeing?
I definitely think the energy is there, you know, and yes, movie ticket prices are higher, but look, I'm a dad of 2. I'm a family of 4. I go to McDonald's and it's $80 now, you know, and so it's like, I still feel like going to the movies, especially if you're a family, is still one of the more inexpensive activities that you can do, even if tickets are at a higher price than they used to be. And so that's why I still preach like, hey, go to the movies. I mean, I tried to go bowling the other day and it was well over $100. I was like, I just want to go bowling, you know? And so it's, you know, so we went to the movies. So I think that, you know, so yes to that, but you know, I look at these 3 big moments since COVID for the movies, and there is a theme to them. You know, I look at when Spider-Man No Way Home came out. And the hype around that, and how everyone went to go see that because of the 3 Spider-Men, because of the multi-generational aspect of that film. People who grew up with either Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland. And so it just drew out so many people. And then I looked at Top Gun Maverick, and to a degree as well, Avatar: The Way of Water. Also, the first Avatar came out 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, many years ago.
Yeah.
And then Top Gun Maverick, mid 1980s, Top Gun mid 1980s. So again, big event movies. A lot of people came out. You had multi-generational sort of aspect to each of those films. And then I look at Barbenheimer was this summer, and the Barbie and the Oppenheimer effect. Here's Barbie. It's an IP that's been around since the 60s. Again, multi-generational. Christopher Nolan has had movies, The Dark Knight. He's been making movies for a couple of decades. So you have this multi-generational aspect. And so I keep saying that word multi-generational because I do think that is a key right now. Not only does a film, I think to a certain degree, need to feel like an event to make, the big money. There's a lot of films that are coming out that are doing just fine. But, in terms of these big ones that everyone's talking about, it's an event, and it's also multi-generational. There's kids that are invested just as much as their parents, just as much as the parents' parents are invested. And then the neighbors, and everyone's kind of has this investment in it, no matter what age you are. And I think right now that is a big key. If a movie wants to be a huge success, is that it resonates with multiple generations of people.
Yeah, I mean, you'll say multi-generational, I'll say nostalgic, because I think Mario comes into that too. I mean, Mario just blew the doors off. Going into that release, I mean, I wouldn't say I never, but there was so much crap being talked about that film before it came out in theaters. I was like, no one's going to go see this movie. And then it blew up and it became, I don't know, I think Barbie has surpassed it at this point, but either way, it's still one of the biggest films of the year. It became massive for them. And then when you look at it, like you said, Top Gun, Barbie, Mario, even Spider-Man, you've got that element of, man, this is my childhood. And now I get to go watch it on the big screen. And there's something so cool about that, where it feels like that's a major factor of drawing people back in. You got to give them something more, basically. It's not just going to be a good movie that drags you in. There's got to be something else that's pulling you in too.
Yeah, for it to be an event like those films. And I think the generation that grew up with Spider-Man, with Barbie, with, Super Mario, that generation now are the ones with kids that are preteens and teenagers. And so that's why those properties, I think, are resonating in a much bigger way. I'm talking like 70s, 80s properties, because those people of my generation now have kids that are growing up and of age to go watch these movies. And they also sort of grew up with some of these properties because their parents were obsessed with them as kids. So my kids were playing Mario and watching Star Wars and doing everything that I was obsessed with as a kid. And so, naturally they're, invested in it too. And so, I do think that those movies, more so than trying to capture Barbenheimer, I don't think necessarily we should try to pair up two movies and try to watch them go at it. I don't think that's necessarily a point to take away from that. But I do think that, that the eventizing of it and the nostalgic multi-generational aspect of it is really a key to the success of other films moving forward.
Event is a great word because we've talked about that in the music industry too. My primary job is with a radio station, so I'm very tied into local events, local concerts. And one thing we've seen is that, you've got your Taylor Swifts, you've got your major, massive artists like that are going to sell out 2-3 nights, whatever you need to do at a show. But there's the majority of the other artists that they're doing fine, but they're not doing what they used to do. They're not pulling the tickets the way they used to. But we're finding it's the concerts that become an event, the concerts that are the can't miss moment of the summer or of the year. Those are the ones that sell. And it feels like that's what movies are too. Like with Barbie, for a great example, all these women that I know went out, bought a ton of pink, went out for a girls' night. A lot of theaters were doing pink carpets instead of red carpets. Like the theaters even made it an event. Like you were getting more for your dollar because you were being a part of something as opposed to just buying your box of popcorn and sitting down. You were a part of a moment. And it kind of feels like that's what movies sort of have to aspire to if they really want to bring in the top dollar right now.
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something there. And like that movie being an event that people feel like their neighbors are talking about and everyone's kind of The news are talking about it. Barbie, what was so smart about that is that they did like these collabs with every store that's in your mall. And so you couldn't walk past the store without seeing Barbie in the window. And it's just, I think it was just a brilliant marketing campaign that really elevated it to where you felt like you had to see it. And I remember the Top Gun Maverick and Spider-Man No Way Home and Avatar The Way of Water, very similar. You just felt like you had to see it. It was everywhere. And so, I think for those movies that aspire to like, billion-dollar global box office juggernauts, to a certain degree, they're going to have to eventize themselves in a way that, replicates what those films did, in terms of drawing audiences in. There are still a lot of smaller films that aren't going to make $1 billion that are super memorable and you're going to love. But I think for those films that really want to like lead the box office for the year, they need to be events in some capacity.
This is not meant in any disrespectful way at all to Oppenheimer, but I can't help but wonder if Oppenheimer had opened on a different weekend where there wasn't the media blitz of Barbenheimer, would it have done as well? Like, would people have been as interested to see it if it was separated from this big media storm of this is the biggest weekend in movies in a decade? You're like, I wonder if its result would have been the same had it have been separated from Barbie in that release.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily say whether or not it would be, but I look at Oppenheimer and I look at what it's done in the subsequent weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Like leading up to Barbenheimer, there was a ton of hype in those first couple of weekends, a ton of hype. But then once you're past those couple of weekends, once the news cycle has run its course, then now you're seeing, okay, what's the longevity of these films? And I think Oppenheimer still, like, I think the other day it just crossed 900 million worldwide. Yeah. And so I think the fact that it's a really good film, that honestly, I think it's going to win Best Picture as well at the Oscars. The fact that it's an experience that is unlike other experiences, especially if you see it in IMAX, especially if you see it in IMAX 70 millimeter, you're just kind of hit with this impactful, memorable experience. So maybe Barbenheimer, the effect of Barbenheimer helped escalate awareness of Oppenheimer, but I do think the film itself has done most of the heavy lifting because it's really good, and people who are seeing it are telling people you have to see Oppenheimer.
What is interesting, and you've always had the big blockbuster films that would make more money than other films, but what's been interesting to me to watch is you get some of these movies that now, of course, I'm going to draw a blank on some titles to throw at you, but you get the movies that would have come out and made a good solid, I don't know, $30, $40 million in the box office, which is, a fair amount of money for a good film. But they're not making that money anymore. It's like people are only saving their money for the big blockbuster, the big film. You know what I mean? So you get those movies that maybe would do really well for the Oscars. They'd get a bunch of nominations that maybe in the box office at the time, $20, $30 million. Now it's like $5 million and they're gone in 1 week kind of thing. And it's been wild to see that shift where it does seem like you're the top dog. There's not really much middle ground anymore. Like the middle ground kind of shifted.
Yeah, I would say in some cases, and like one interesting thing that we saw this summer was that, like films like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Pixar's Elemental, they had legs on them. So like maybe they didn't open up. Like I think there's so much attention on opening weekend.
That's it.
And I think that obsession with opening weekend needs to sort of die down a little bit because the urgency to see a film as soon as it comes out isn't necessarily what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And so I do think these films, if they're good films, they have these legs over time. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 over time became one of the highest grossing movies of the year. Elemental over time became one of Pixar's best movies. So I think over time, some of these films that may look like they're underperforming because they don't have the opening weekend numbers that maybe we used to see from that franchise or from films like it. Over time now, people are saying, hey, I'm going to wait till week 2 to go see this, or I'm going to wait, until my uncle's in town because he likes this. They're not running out to see it right away. And then, I think also there's a life after these films at home too. I think, we see it on Vudu. There's a lot of people that go to watch these movies when they arrive home. And, that's one thing that we saw born out of COVID was this, what they call a PVOD window, which is this premium VOD. So some of these smaller films that maybe don't make a lot of noise theatrically, after about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they're on PVOD. Mm-hmm. So now you can watch them at home at a higher price point. And then they go to EST, and then they go to VOD, and then they're on DVD, and then the streaming rights are sold. So, a film that maybe makes $5 million in the theater may do really well over time because there's all these other subsequent windows now that exist for them for audiences to find them on.
So let me ask you this question then, because there was a big discussion about Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones. These films were expected to be really big blockbusters, and they did fine. They made money. It wasn't like they bombed and didn't do anything, but didn't quite do what people were expecting. So you, as a critic, as a movie fan, what do you think films like that need to do moving forward to remind people, hey, even Fast X or whatever it was this year, also kind of the same thing. What do they have to do to remind people, hey, you love us, like come see us, come see our next film? Because besides Indiana Jones, they all have another one planned.
Yeah, it's funny because I really like the Indiana Jones movie.
I enjoyed it too.
I think there's a certain degree that people didn't want to watch Harrison Ford at 70 or 80, being Indiana Jones. I think there was a certain degree there that wasn't as much of a draw as maybe it would have been at a different point. And the Indiana Jones franchise too, I don't know, like, even though it is multi-generational, I don't know younger generations what their relationship is with Indiana Jones, because it's itself based on 1930s serials that I don't know if the TikTok generation is really opening themselves up to that at this moment. Maybe they are, but so I think that's what Indy's sort of struggle was. But I do tell everybody to watch it because I think it's a good movie. But I think that you have to reinvent yourself, and I think that's what people want to see. I just saw the movie The Creator, which is the next movie from Gareth Edwards, who did Rogue One. And it's like this big, bold, like original sci-fi movie. And yeah, it's got familiar story beats, the AI versus humans. Like we've seen the Terminator, like it's got these familiar beats, but it kind of reinvents those familiar beats in a fresh way. And so I'm looking at like some of these franchises that there's still weight to them, right? Like the Jurassic movies, they're going to come back. Fast continues, so some of these franchises, there's still life in them, but I do think you got to reinvent and give the audiences a unique viewpoint that maybe they haven't had yet for these characters. I'm looking ahead to Deadpool 3.
Sure.
It's the third Deadpool movie, but it's the first R-rated film from Marvel Studios. And here we are, 30 films in or whatever from Marvel Studios, who've been around since 2008 now. And I think that there's a certain level of like, here's another Marvel movie, So I look at them and I say, reinvent yourself, do something, give the audience something they haven't seen from Marvel Studios yet. And here's an R-rated movie. We haven't seen that yet. So I think there's an answer somewhere in there in terms of just reinventing yourself for the modern era, for the fans that kind of came before. Yeah, you're giving them what they're looking for. But for these new fans, you're giving them a fresh look at what you have to offer. So I would say just don't be cookie cutter with your part 7 or 8, like, push the boundaries and reinvent what people think they know about, make them rethink what they think they know about your franchise.
All right, Erik. So I know the next couple of years of box office stuff is going to look a little different given everything that's been going on in the world. But what are you looking forward to over the next few months? I know holiday season's a big time of year for the box office. So what are you excited for that's coming out here in the near future?
Yeah, The Creator is one that I'll mention because I love that. That comes out at the end of September. But, I'm a big Marvel fan. So that Marvels movie that's in November that was voted our most anticipated film. We did a fall movie survey. So that's going to be the one I think the fans are going to want to see the most. I saw a couple of films at the Toronto Film Festival that are coming out that I really liked. There's a Nicolas Cage film called Dream Scenario.
I just saw the trailer for that. It looks wild. And it looks so confusing. Like the trailer gives you just enough to be like, okay, something's interesting here. But then I'm like, well, what's happening? What's going on?
Yeah, he plays like a schlubby like teacher who all of a sudden realizes that dozens of strangers are dreaming about him. And how does that affect him? he becomes a de facto celebrity and his life kind of spirals out of control. So it's got this like weird premise, but it's really funny and just really great Nicolas Cage performance. I like films like that are just weird and take a big swing, and this one does. It's funny, I just got back from the Toronto Film Festival. A lot of teacher-themed films, a lot of teachers, writers. So a lot of those kinds of films that are coming out. There's another one called The Holdovers, which I loved, which was directed by Alexander Payne. Stars Paul Giamatti. They did Sideways together, about a teacher who has to hold over during the Christmas break with some students. Set in the 70s, filmed as if it was a film from the 70s. So if you're a fan of 70s filmmaking, definitely see The Holdovers. I think it's great. Other than that, I'm looking ahead to December. There's an Aquaman sequel, which curious about that. You also have a musical adaptation of The Color Purple that looks really fascinating and interesting. The film that won the Audience Award at Toronto, which I really loved, the film called American Fiction, starring Jeffrey Wright. I thought that was really good. So you have some of those coming out. And then into 2024, there's a new Deadpool movie, which we talked about, a new Godzilla versus Kong movie. Dune Part 2 was my most anticipated fall movie, and now it's shifted into March. And so that one is, I would say, right up there for me. I love the first Dune. Yeah. I can't wait to see.
Oh my gosh. The filming of that, it just was so beautiful to watch, the first Dune. It was just, even if you didn't like the story, it was just stunning to see how they put the whole thing together. I was gripped to the screen when that one came out.
Exactly. Yeah. So though it's those kinds of films, those big, IMAX, like you got to see it on the biggest screen possible with the best sound. It's going to take you to another planet or another universe. Like that's the kind of stuff that really feeds me. I love that stuff. That's why I can't stop talking about The Creator, because it was one of those kinds of movies that just took me somewhere else to the future, and I kind of got to hang out in this really wild place for a while. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking forward to the most. And I think there's a lot out there. There's a new Exorcist movie that's coming out that looks crazy, from the guy who remade all the Halloween, that did the Halloween sequels. So a lot of horror that's on the way. So yeah. Oh, and how do I not mention the Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon?
Oh, right.
Which I think that one, his first movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and De Niro in the same movie. I've seen it. It's really strong. And I think come Oscar time, it's going to be Killers of the Flower Moon versus Oppenheimer, Scorsese versus Nolan. I think it's going to be a fun Oscar season.
That'll be a cool battle to talk about. Well, Erik Davis, managing editor for Fandango, I appreciate all your insight. I love what you do over there at Fandango. I'm a constant user. Whenever I go to a movie, that's the first place I go to buy my ticket, to find my seat, to do all of it that I need. So, Erik, thank you for your time. I appreciate everything.
Thanks a lot, man. Have a good one.
Big thank you to Erik Davis. Check out his work on Fandango. Honestly, I always use Fandango before I head to my local theater. It is definitely an app on my phone that's gotten a lot of use. And thank you to all of you for checking out the Adult Education Podcast. Until next week, be well.